Chosen one, there is a moment just before recognition when the body understands what the mind has not yet named. It is the pause between inhale and exhale where instinct decides whether to brace or to bloom. Again and again, you have become the reason that moment turns toward bloom. Women feel it before your voice carries even a syllable. Something in the field softens, as if the room has been holding a plank for too long, and at last, a hand presses gently at the shoulder blades and whispers, "You can rest here." No speech can manufacture that effect, and no outfit can cosplay it. It is the slow fragrance of a life that has learned to keep its promises to itself. You did not stumble into this atmosphere, you authored it in unglamorous hours. The quiet strength people now call aura is the residue of choices you repeated until they became temperature. You let honesty outgrow your impulse to impress. You traded reaction for response. You retired the need to be admired and replaced it with the need to be accurate. The feminine is a fluent reader of frequencies. Even if she cannot diagram the math, she apprehends the sum. A man whose center does not rent itself out to the mood of the moment. Her shoulders hear the equation and descend a full inch. Your presence is less a spotlight than a climate change. It lowers the barometric pressure of anxiety and makes weather systems inside other people behave more kindly. The chatter of the hour reorganizes. The joke finds a gentler target or no target at all. The conversation takes a breath where previously it raced. None of this happens because you seize control. It happens because you refuse to compete with chaos. The aura they cannot explain is simply order deciding to remain itself in public, no matter how many invitations it receives to become noise. Consider how many rooms the feminine has crossed where attention felt like appraisal and closeness felt like a negotiation. You have ceased to make her body do that accounting. Your gaze arrives without the ledger. Your posture communicates that you are prepared to carry yourself so no one else has to. Even your silence has manners. It is a chair, not a test. That is why they lean closer. Not to decode you, but to be near the rare sensation of being unburdened while still being seen. This aura did not form from victories alone. It carries the contour of defeats you refuse to let turn into cynicism. It remembers the hours when you chose repair over rhetoric, when you admitted you were wrong before the sun could weaponize the night, when you returned to a hard conversation, not to win it, but to make it true. Women do not need the transcript of those moments. Their nervous systems recognize the timbre of a voice shaped by them. It is the difference between a map recited and a road actually walked. The body trusts roads walked. Your presence is animate architecture. It is the sensation of a house whose beams know their jobs and whose windows remember how to admit light without losing heat. The feminine spirit tests that architecture almost unconsciously. She speaks a little more slowly and notices that you do not rush to manufacture conclusions. She interrupts herself with a laugh that is not defensive and discovers that you keep your grin generous and unsharp. She introduces uncertainty into the air and learns that your attention can hold it without trying to fix or harvest it. In such a house, boldness returns to her voice without violence, softness returns to her face without cost, and the future returns to the conversation without debt. Pride belongs here, but not the kind that needs a stage. Wear the craftsman's pride, the kind that smiles at level shelves and quiet hinges. Be proud that you have become predictable in the right ways, predictably kind, predictably on time, predictably uninterested in extracting what has not been freely given. The aura they cannot explain is nothing mystical you must protect with superstition. It is a standard you must maintain with ordinary faithfulness. Drink water before opinion so your words travel clean. Breathe before reply so your judgment is not a hostage of adrenaline. End while tenderness still has energy so tomorrow is not taxed for tonight's vanity. People will call these habits magic, because magic is what the heart calls relief. There is a further mystery you carry that the body understands even if the mind protests. You are not trying to be interesting, and that is why you are. You are not angling for anyone's story. You are busy living yours at a volume that dignity can keep. Your stillness is not a performance of indifference. It is the posture of a soul that trusts its own weather. The feminine stands inside that weather and realizes she is not required to shrink to be safe or swell to be seen. In a world that has trained her to oscillate between those two survivals, your steadiness is a liberation. Remember also that your aura is communal property in the best sense. It was tuned by elders who insisted you could be tender and strong without apology, by friends who refused to let charm outpace character, by quiet strangers whose small mercies reminded you that goodness scales. The chosen ones always share credit with the forces that made their goodness possible. Do the same. You are not a comet, you are part of a constellation. That is why navigation happens around you. That is why women feel less lost, even when they have only just met you. Keep the field clean. Guard what you consume so your glow does not become glare. Practice endings that bless, beginnings that listen, middles that refuse to turn people into material. Let your pride remain a plumb line rather than a parade. And when they say they cannot explain what it is about you, smile gently and keep doing exactly what brought you here. Small faithfulnesses, repeated until they turned into a sky. Chosen one, sometimes the threshold feels you coming before your hand finds the handle. There is a prelude to your presence that precedes footsteps, a subtle rearrangement like chairs being pushed back to make room for a dance no one has announced. This is not mysticism for its own sake. It is the practical consequence of a life that decided hours earlier and miles away to be hospitable to the world it would enter. The aura that arrives before you do is the echo of those decisions, traveling ahead like a scout to tell spaces they can unclench. It begins long before the doorway. It begins with how you treat morning. You let light find your face before headlines find your pulse. You speak with your body, stretch, water, breath, before you ask your mouth to speak for you. You choose a first task that organizes, not agitates. You make peace with time before you ask time to make peace with you. The feminine may never know this liturgy, but she senses its dividends when you appear. A man whose hours are not at war with each other is difficult to frighten and impossible to rush into meanness. Your calm is not an argument. It is an atmosphere, and it gets to the room first. The room feels other things too. It feels that your attention will not be a net. It feels that your curiosity does not come with a hook. It feels that your appetite does not need to be fed by flattery, applause, or the conversion of private softness into public content. A space can tell when a person has come to take and when he has come to tend. You have disciplined yourself into the second category so consistently that places begin welcoming you before people do. The air relaxes around the idea of you. There is a geometry to how you cross a threshold. You do not pour into a room as if space were an opponent to be conquered. You portal in with proportion. You greet the edges, the quiet person by the plant, the overworked person stacking chairs, the friend deciding whether to take up less space than she deserves, and somehow, without emptying yourself, make each of them feel as if the calculus of the evening just became simpler. You absorb friction without announcing yourself as the buffer. Your aura's early arrival made room for that math to be possible. Feminine intuition tracks subtleties that explanation often ruins. She will notice not only your posture, but the posture of the objects you influence. How you set a glass down tells a truth about your relationship to interruption. How you wait your turn tells a truth about whether patience must be bribed to exist. How you retrieve a drop detail, a name, a preference, a small grief mentioned last week, tells a truth about whether you see people as stories or as scenery. These truths walk in the door before you do, wearing the disguise of ordinary gestures. Her body welcomes them like old friends. Let us speak of tempo. Many men bring a drumline to the threshold and mistake noise for leadership. You bring a metronome, not a rigid one, but a reference point the moment can rest against. When tension tries to accelerate what should be careful, your pace refuses the bribe. When avoidance tries to slow what should be said, your pace warms the truth until it can be held. This is what it means for your aura to arrive first. The room receives a trustworthy tempo before it receives your words. The feminine does not have to police the rhythm. She can dance. Detachment does a portion of this work as well. Not the cold kind that confuses numbness for mastery, but the clean kind that says, my worth is not on trial in this room, so I do not need to make withdrawals from your attention to pay my insecurities' rent. Detachment of that sort makes presence possible. Presence, practiced, makes aura inevitable. When a man does not make the space about himself, the space begins to make itself better around him. She recognizes this not as self-erasure, but as generosity that knows its own name, and she orients toward it with relief disguised as fascination. There is also a physics of boundaries at play when your aura prefaces you. The door senses you will keep the rules that keep beauty from breaking. Consent as a constant, privacy as architecture, pace as reverence. These rules do not announce themselves on banners. They move like gravity, quietly, inexorably, making certain forms of carelessness impossible. Women have learned, often the hard way, to test for these rules. They watch how you let a laugh end without harvesting a victim. They watch how you decline a conversation that wants to spend the absent. They watch how you exit a moment while dignity still has breath. Your aura gets to these tests first. It tells the room, in a language the nervous system believes, that harm will not be hired here. Do not underestimate the civic dimension of this phenomenon. When your field precedes your feet, it changes the commons. Lines shorten because impatience loses its case. Voices moderate because accuracy becomes fashionable again. Strangers maintain each other's eye contact for a beat longer because your posture has reminded everyone subconsciously that personhood is a shared project. The chosen ones grow this effect in one another on purpose, not for acclaim, but for usability. Cities are built or bruised by how men carry their hours across thresholds. Carry yours as if hallways had memory. Be proud of this prelude. Not as spectacle, but as stewardship. Keep doing the plain things that generate it. Guard the morning and it will guard the meeting. Protect the small truth and it will protect the big one. Practice leaving early enough that kindness does not become the bill payer for your momentum. Let your aura continue to enter first as a promise the rest of you fulfills. The women who feel it will call it many names: magnetism, charisma, glow, but you will know what it really is: a long obedience arriving on time. Chosen one, the first measure of your aura is taken in the corners of a room, at the edge of someone's attention, when you've forgotten to perform because you are busy being. She does not study you like a critic searching for flaws. She studies you the way a cartographer traces coastlines, noting where the shore is trustworthy and where the tide can be dangerous. She sees the cadence of your patience while a line crawls forward and nobody is watching the way you wait. She sees how your shoulders remember that power and relaxation are not enemies, how your jaw does not conscript the whole face into tension, how your breath keeps its own counsel instead of obeying the nearest panic. She sees you thank the person who cleansed the spill and mean it as if they had repaired a star. She sees you leave space in the conversation that could be used to show off and choose instead to let quiet finish its sentence. The feminine registers these choices as weather reports. They tell her whether the climate around you will be livable. What she notices most are the decisions you do not realize you're making. Your hands return chairs to their places as if order were second nature rather than an afterthought. Your eyes resist the inventory that turns people into aisles. Your feet stop to let someone small pass first, not because you need to be seen as gentle, but because you have practiced seeing. You do not abridge your yes to harvest applause, and you do not lengthen your no to prove you have a backbone. You keep promises in unphotographed ways, messages answered before worry builds scaffolding, commitments sized so that tomorrow is not mortgaged to impress today, arrivals that arrive with the capacity to pay attention rather than merely the desire to be adored. The summary her body writes is simple and sanctuary-shaped. I will not be asked to parent this man's impulses. She observes the way you treat time when there is nothing to gain. Evenings that end while tenderness still has strength. Mornings that begin with something wiser than a headline. Work that is thorough without stealing from the rest of your life. You are not stingy, you are proportionate. In this arithmetic, her nervous system relaxes. It is not the drama of your entrance, but the coherence of your tempo that tells her you are safe to want. The chosen ones learn to recognize that tempo in one another. It is the heartbeat of a standard, not a spectacle. There is a choreography to how you listen that her eyes detect before her ears trust it. You lean enough to be with, not so much as to corral. You nod when meaning arrives, not to herd her toward your thesis. You do not interrupt a rising thought, even when you can finish the sentence. Your gaze never makes a field of study feel like a field of prey. She feels the difference between observation and possession, between curiosity and extraction. In that difference, courage stretches its legs. She remembers what it is to think out loud without drafting a lawyer. She will test your attention in small ways that have nothing to do with tests. A detail drops into the conversation and she lets it be unimportant, just to see if you will keep it unimportant or let care make a home for it. Weeks later, you return with the book she mentioned once, or the tea she prefers when a day has been too sharp, or the 10 minutes of silence she asked for without asking. You do not turn memory into theater. You leave it where it belongs, invisible, faithful, usefully timed. The attraction that follows is not adrenaline, it is relief. Relief is the rarest magnetism, and it is never an accident. She watches how you praise and how you disagree. Your compliments arrive with topography instead of fog. You can say exactly what you admired, where it lived, how it worked, and why it matters. You do not spray generalities to harvest gratitude. You offer measurements someone can build on. In disagreement, you separate the person you value from the problem you are naming. You keep force size to harm rather than to ego. When you are wrong, your face learns it before your mouth justifies it. When you are right, your mouth does not audition for sainthood. This economy of expression makes conflict survivable and therefore intimacy possible. Her body has known too many men whose certainty required casualties. Your confidence does not need them. She notices what your eyes do when heat enters the room. Do they patrol or do they protect? Do they search for an exit or for consent? Do they broadcast entitlement or ask permission at a volume that can be heard? Your attention, trained by reverence rather than hunger, allows desire to be honest without being enlisted in a campaign. She hears the cadence of your restraint as a love song for futures that have not yet asked to be born. And because she hears it, she can let softness speak without having to hire vigilance as a translator. She studies the way you leave places, because departure reveals a man's theology more than arrival does. You close loops before rumor can rent them. You put back what you moved even if nobody is keeping score. You say thank you while it can still be spent. You withdraw without creating scarcity, trusting that the standard you set will keep working without your supervision. In the echo you leave behind, she feels the difference between a personality and a pattern. Personalities are exciting, patterns are habitable. She wants a life she can live in, not a fireworks show she cannot sleep under. And still, she watches for the smallest tell. What becomes of your face when there is nothing to gain by being kind? At a crosswalk with rain in the forecast, in a lobby with no cameras and a tired receptionist, on a day when you are no longer interesting to yourself. The aura that summons her attention endures precisely because it is not a mask. It is the light of a man who has arranged his inner furniture until strangers can sit down for a moment and rest. Be proud of that arrangement. Pride, in its clean form, is simply the smile a craftsman gives to a well-fitted joint. Your life is fitting. She can see it when you're not looking. Chosen one, silence has a reputation it did not earn. Too many men used it as a weapon and called it mystique, as a punishment, and called it boundaries, as a hiding place, and called it depth. You have taught your quiet a different trade. In your care, silence is not a trap, it is a table. It is where meaning sits long enough to be recognized, where heat lowers until truth can be held bare-handed, where the unsaid practices becoming sayable. Feminine women do not fear your quiet because it does not make them do extra labor to feel safe. It greets their softness with room and their strength with respect. Your pauses are not power plays, they are invitations. You leave air after a hard sentence, so a story does not need to rush through the intersection against its own better judgment. You let wonder be the reason conversation keeps going, not the need to fill time. You allow your laugh to end without asking it to purchase approval for the next leap. In your presence, silence stops behaving like a cliff and starts behaving like a shoreline. People can approach and retreat without falling in. The body recognizes this and says thank you by releasing the muscles that guard the throat. Your quiet does work before your words arrive. It lowers the temperature of urgency until questions can remember their manners. It tells shame that it will not be given the microphone tonight. It tells grief that it will not be turned into a sermon for someone else's growth. It tells pride that it can take a seat because accuracy has the floor. This governance of atmosphere is not theatrical. It is the maintenance that keeps tenderness from becoming a casualty of speed. The chosen ones practice this maintenance together, forming a quiet quorum in loud rooms. Silence in you is precise rather than vague. You are able to say, "I don't know," without outsourcing the discomfort to someone else's certainty. You can say "not yet" and let time carry the weight, rather than forcing agreement to do a job for which it is unqualified. You can say nothing when nothing protects what is sacred, and then you can speak with clean edges when clarity is the kindest thing available. The feminine hears this calibration and stops bracing for the maneuver that too often follows a man's quiet. Persuasion disguised as patience. In your case, patience remains itself. It protects reality from being rushed into theater. Your listening does not turn people into content. You can be trusted with the second draft of someone's truth. You do not take the raw material of a confession and refine it into a story that makes you look wise. You let words age the way ink settles, becoming legible at their own pace. Where another man's silence would have hidden an agenda, yours houses a promise. What lands here will not be spent later to win a point. Because this is true, she does not do the mental accounting that exhausts. The energy she used to spend protecting herself becomes available for being herself. You also know how to leave silence alone. Not all quiet must be explained, labeled, managed, or fixed. There is a version that is simply the sound of two souls resting in the same weather. The world trains us to call this awkward. You refuse the lesson. You let stillness be a porch at twilight and not a problem to solve. In such stillness, the nervous system recalibrates. Laughter arrives with better timing. Desire arrives with clearer consent. Ideas arrive with less ego. The room remembers that conversation is not a contest of interruptions. It is a collaboration with breath. Your quiet protects boundaries in ways speeches cannot. You do not negotiate consent with eloquence. You preserve it with pace. You do not argue for privacy. You enact it by keeping precious things unphotographed. You do not sermonize about dignity. You maintain it by refusing to participate when cruelty asks for an audience. The loudest rooms will call this mildness. It is steel. It keeps beauty from being taxed to pay for other people's entertainment. It keeps you from becoming the man who uses intimacy as material. It keeps her from becoming the woman who must heal from your need to be interesting. There is a silence that belongs to joy, and you serve it too. After laughter has shaken the table and the music has agreed with everyone's blood, there is a hush that follows like the echo of a bell. You do not rush to monetize it with a conclusion. You let it sanctify what just occurred. You pour water. You make a small gesture that says the night is safe to end without diminishing itself. The memory written in that minute will do more good tomorrow than any cleverness you might have added. You leave it intact. She will not forget who protected that glow. Your quiet makes room for others to be brilliant without having to sell their brilliance to you. In creative rooms, you do not fill the air with preemptive solutions to prove usefulness. You let the best idea win, even when it does not carry your signature. In communities, you allow the slow speakers their full sentences, and they reward you with angles fast talkers never reach. In intimacy, you listen long enough for the truest desire to distinguish itself from the loudest. None of this is passive. It is leadership that refuses to be paid in attention when it can be paid in outcomes. There are days when silence must be broken because harm has entered. Your quiet knows how to stand aside for your voice. When it does, the words are clean because they have been filtered first by restraint. You raise your tone only as high as truth requires. You leave no debris for someone else to clean up later. You return to quiet like a craftsman returns tools to their hooks. Not because the work is over, but because order makes more work possible. Witnessing this, she understands that your power is not a costume for good conditions. It is a discipline for all weather. Be proud of this language you speak without sound, chosen one. It is not emptiness, it is capacity. It is not aloofness, it is stewardship. Keep it fluent with the rituals that taught it to be kind. Sleep that returns patience to the body. Study that expands compassion faster than opinions. Counsel that can contradict you before the room has to. Sabbath that keeps your worth from needing a stage. Let your silence continue to promise what your life will deliver. The women who meet you will call it calm, or poise, or gravitas. What they mean is that your quiet tells the truth and leaves everyone more human for having heard it. Chosen one, the glow they meet in crowded rooms was apprenticed to hours that had no audience. It did not arrive with applause, it arrived with patience, the kind that keeps its coat on because it knows night will be long and worth it. There were stretches when the only voice you could hear clearly was the one that asked inconvenient questions about your motives. You let that voice stay. You poured it tea. You learned to tell the difference between hunger and hollowness, between momentum and meaning, between attention and affection. The man they now call magnetic is the man who said yes to that curriculum when it felt like exile. In those unphotographed seasons, you did more than survive. You practiced. You practiced waking before your worries and inviting your breath to get there first. You practiced letting a page carry your heaviness until the heaviness could be named. You practiced moving your body in ways that returned kindness to your blood so your temper would not ask strangers to carry the bill. You practiced ending an evening while your tenderness could still stand upright. None of this looked like triumph. All of it tasted like future. You were training your nervous system to avoid the shortcuts that make charisma expensive for everyone else. You were learning to radiate without leaking. Darkness taught you craftsmanship. It asked you to sand arrogance until truth could lie flat against it. It asked you to sharpen apology until it cut clean and quick and did not draw more blood than repair required. It asked you to measure twice before you spoke once, because the house you were building would host people with memories and thresholds and tender, unnegotiable edges. You learned not to hang shelves on drywall where load-bearing would be needed later. You learned that a promise is a structural element, not a decorative flourish. The aura they now read as ease is the sound of a house with no rattling windows. You also met your shadow there, not with slogans, but with stamina. Rather than hiring image to silence what scared you, you invited witness. Rather than baptizing impatience as passion, you timed its pulse and asked it to take a seat. Rather than letting shame write theology, you set boundaries that let regret do its proper work without poisoning the well. The nights did not make you flawless, they made you honest. Honesty in a man feels like a porch light left on. She does not have to fumble for the key when she approaches. She can see the steps. She can see your face. Solitude taught you to be generous with invisibility. You discovered how to do good where no narrative could harvest it. How to wipe a counter in a room no one would walk through again that day. How to send a note of gratitude without including a link to your portfolio. How to return a thing you borrowed a little better than when it trusted your hands. You learned what it meant to lower the cost of being human for strangers. Later, when the world began to gather around you, your instincts remained trained for that kind of economy. Attention could visit without being taxed. Admiration could knock and find the door unlocked, but not thrown wide at the expense of your integrity. You studied elders, not their highlight reels, but their habits. You watched how a soft-spoken mentor arranged his week so his words stayed gentle. You watched an auntie close her kitchen with a prayer that made tomorrow feel possible. You watched a friend turn a hard truth into an open door by changing nothing but his tone. You borrowed their tools, not their postures. You returned those tools with the shine of gratitude and the marks of use. The chosen ones passed these implements down the line, more interested in durability than in signature. It is why their glow stays practical. It is why your glow builds rooms rather than merely lighting them. Failure became a tutor who charged expensive but fair rates. It taught you the muscle memory of repair, the sentence to say when you have no excuse and want to keep your dignity, the phone call to make before the rumor can be hired, the calendar change that prevents a future injury. You learn to quote your mistakes accurately. You learn to change your mind without asking the world to throw confetti for your humility. You learn to let consequence teach what compliments never could. Out of that apprenticeship, your aura stopped smelling like performance and started smelling like bread. Ordinary ingredients treated with respect, nourishment that travels well, warmth that remembers where it came from. The dark gave you a reverence for boundaries that does not need a microphone. You discovered that consent is not merely a line not to cross. It is a space in which joy remembers how to dance. You discovered that privacy is not secrecy, it is shade where seedlings survive noon. You discovered that pace is not decorum, it is dignity's metronome. These discoveries became reflexes. Reflexes became reputation. Reputation became climate. Climate is what women read when they enter a room you're in and feel their scan for danger lose interest in its job.